it makes, they don't know what they did. So I guess you lose time, and maybe that's what they're after. They're just trying to lose time. Phencyclidine is what it is. Really crazy stuff. They put it on, it's a powder, usually it's a powder, and they put it in, they sprinkle it on marijuana, and then they get all kinds of goofball stuff, but they don't remember anything. Oh, I know. They can't remember anything, which sounds stupid to me, but I just don't understand any of this stuff anyway. There it is. There we go, okay. Okay, PCP antagonizes the NMDA receptor, and it stimulates the release of the transmitter dopamine. So it makes you feel like, everything's a reward to you because it's releasing all this dopamine. Now normally dopamine, of course, is only released when something happens that's good. But in this case, we got this tons of dopamine being released. They're focusing on the feeling of euphoria. Since they're focusing on the feeling of euphoria, you can break their leg, you can shoot them in the leg, you can shoot them in the arm, you can stab them anywhere you want, and they don't feel it because they're focusing on what's going on in their brain. Research shows that possibly PCP acts on the prefrontal cortex and produces transient psychosis. And boy, I'll tell you, that's about right. Research with animals also shows degeneration of the hippocampus and cingulate gyrus. Hippocampus, of course, has to do with your memory. I'm not exactly sure why these people are doing so many negative things to their memory. And it doesn't seem to bother them very much. What they're doing is they're setting themselves for early onset Alzheimer's disease. I was reading about Ingemar Johansson. He was the world boxing champion back in the 50s and in the early 60s. And he was good friends with the guy that he beat up to win the world championship, Floyd Patterson. It said that both of them were the best of friends into their 50s, but in their 50s, both of them started suffering from boxing-related dementia. Yeah. And they lived into their 70s. Johansson lived into his early 80s, and Floyd Patterson lived into his late 70s. But for the last 20 years of each of their lives, they didn't know anything because they couldn't, even though they were the best of friends for an extended length of time, they didn't know anything because both of them suffered from boxing-related dementia. As cute, goofy as that is, so anything that disrupts the hippocampus, now we got a problem. One of the newest street drugs is the hallucinogen. It's the European rave drug ecstasy, also known as MDMA. A lot of people take this stuff, especially over to Europe. It's not that popular in the United States, but it's real popular over to Europe. And these kids, they play this really strange techno music where it's just a constant beat, kind of like those guys with their NAC drum. They beat it really fast, and they're out there. And,
I listen to that.
Okay. It's the same stuff.
Yes.
It's just a constant beat. It's almost like they're nervous and they can't control themselves.
Yeah.
That's the way it is with this techno music that they play overseas. The drug is a combination of amphetamine and hallucinogen. It sounds really good, doesn't it? Amphetamine and a hallucinogen, and it affects the serotonin-producing neurons in the brain. Okay, so what we're doing is we're stimulating the serotonin-producing cells in your brain. You produce an excess amount of this stuff. So what happens next? Well, you get what they refer to as excitotoxicity. Anytime you create too much of a neurotransmitter in your brain, you get what they call a downregulation. In other words, the number of receptor sites decreases because there's too much stuff. And your brain wants to always be normal. It's seeking normality. And if you've got too much of one substance in your brain, then the receptor sites for that substance, whether it's acetylcholine or dopamine or serotonin is reduced. If you're depressed, this is one of the reasons why the brain is always trying to fix itself. If there's something going on, if you're depressed, then your brain will increase, it will upregulate the receptor sites. So you'll have more receptor sites looking for more stimulation. That's if you're depressed, or if you're anxious, of course, it will reduce the number of, it'll increase the number of GABA receptor sites. And this is one of the reasons why you can't stay depressed for 2 or 3 weeks on an end. It just doesn't, it can't work that way because your brain is always trying to fix itself. Same thing with MDMA. MDMA superficially increases the amount of serotonin in your receptors, in your synaptic cleft. However, at the same time, because it's such a strong dosage, it reduces the number of serotonin receptor sites. Okay, so you go to a rave, you have a big party, you almost kill yourself because you're drooling, because it makes you drool, as bizarre as that seems. A lot of these people die of, they either overheat or they dehydrate to the point that they kill themselves. This happens all the time. This kind of stuff happens all the time. So if you're going someplace where they're having a rave, like in a warehouse in Amsterdam,
or downtown LA.
Or downtown LA, the air conditioning is on to the 40s or in the 40s or 50s. Otherwise, these people would cook themselves to death. So when you first go in there, if you're not on MDMA, you're freezing to death.
Yeah, they have the festivals in Las Vegas every summer.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
there we go.
Yeah, they got a big one in the desert in India, or Coachella Valley. Yeah, there's a big one out there.
Coachella's really nice. I went there like 3 years ago, but it's nice.
But you're still alive. So
Wow,
we're
'cause
okay.
I don't use that.
Those parties were popular in the 90s. Like, I went to
Yeah,
one.
I know.
Freaking Wu-Tang was there.
Oh,
Yeah.
Wu-Tang Clan.
Like this year they had Ariana Grande be the headliner, and then last year was Beyonce was.
I would not have a rave out in the middle of the desert.
But back then it was like party crews and
I think
rebels
it would have been better.
and a lot of
back
house
in the
music and
day.
stuff.
Yeah, they have house music, but they have a mixture of all music now in Coachella.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's good. Of course, a lot of these people aren't hearing music anyway. Whatever music is playing is just the most wonderful music in the world.
They don't let
And they want to hug everybody, as bizarre as that seems. MDMA, while it has a calming effect during its use, it may actually be creating a state of excitotoxicity if it's used very frequently. You can imagine you've got all this serotonin splashing through your system. Your brain's trying to protect itself by downregulating. So what happens tomorrow? Well, today you feel really good. Tomorrow, all of a sudden, you've got fewer serotonin receptor sites, so you're depressed. Of course you're depressed. And this will last for about a week. So if you rave every weekend, you're just on the only time you feel good.
Crappy work week. Huh?
Yeah, your work week is just crap, as horrible as that seems. Anyway, so it's trying to give you the message not to do this. Wait a minute, come on, there we go. Well, I don't even have, oh, it's gone. All right, let's go back. Okay. So now we got a problem, especially if somebody's a chronic user of this stuff or uses it every weekend. Now, potentially, of course, it won't kill them, certainly, if they don't dehydrate or if they don't cook themselves to death. Animal studies have shown marked decreases in serotonin axons after use. This may affect your mood and your memory perpetually. And it never recovers. If you lose serotonin producing cells in your brain, you never get them back. It's like dopamine. And that's why people have Parkinson's disease. This is a Parkinson's disease, but it's chronic depression.
Yeah.
And now there's nothing we can do. I guess we can give them SSRIs potentially, but The problem is they're not producing enough serotonin, and we really can't give somebody serotonin.
So if it's just like too far gone, that's it?
Not a whole lot that can happen. A lot of times, these individuals will end up having seizures. Sometimes of course, they die from dehydration, and they die from the excess heat. You know, a lot. There's nothing we can do. I mean, it's a biochemical disaster. But at least they had a good time. There you go.
For that one.
Well, I was bang.
Yeah, because I noticed people do dehydrate a lot.
Yeah.
during that.
And they suck on pacifiers.
Oh, they do have pacifiers.
The hell? Babies?
They have to suck on the pacifiers because they're drooling. They've got all this fluid.
Illegal hippies, man.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's just too weird. Addiction to nicotine, alcohol, drugs injure the community by running up medical expenses and causing people to die prematurely. Substance abusers commit crimes and cause traffic accidents. The cost of helping addicts control their addiction and that of controlling drug trafficking is extremely high, of course. It's one of the reasons why the president wants to close the border. He wants to close the border because of all the drugs coming across the border. At least that's what he says. Babies born to women using addictive substances impairs brain growth. And I told you about my niece who was addicted to heroin. She was addicted to heroin. They caught her while she was pregnant. So they put her in a mental institution to detoxify her. She also had bipolar disorder. To detoxify her, she was there for a couple of weeks. They thought they cleaned her up. They let her go, and they gave her a synthetic opioid. They gave her an opioid that was supposed to reduce her cravings, and it was supposed to keep her okay. Instead, she used the synthetic, and she also used heroin, shot up with heroin at the same time. So my nephew, my great-great-nephew, was born addicted to heroin, as ugly as that is. A lot of times these babies don't survive, but he did. It took him 6 months to get, or 6 weeks to get him off of the heroin, as ugly as that is. Cried the whole time, I guess. He's still a crier, so. Anyway, we'll see what happens. According to my brother, everything's fine, the baby's great. I told him that he will be highly susceptible to addiction in the future. So they need to be careful with what they give him. He will be addicted to all kinds of crazy things like a select type of cereal, or he'll have to have a certain type of candy or something.
Yeah.
This is going to be very common, and then, of course, as he gets older, he will start, if he ever starts using, he's a goner. If he ever starts drinking or shooting up or snorting or doing whatever he's going to do, he's because his brain's already configured to be an addict.
How about for parents? Well, like I've seen I don't know if you've seen the show called Intervention. You know, like how the families, even they're like the children of those people that are addicted. Do you think it's like a learning process for them as well? Do you think because they watch somebody go through this that they won't do it?
No.
No?
No, it happens with 1 out of 10.
Okay.
Or whatever, 1 out of 5. If you've got a family of 6 kids, you're going to have 5 addicts and one that is religiously against using whatever. We see this with families of alcoholics. The whole family's alcoholics except for the one white sheep. Everybody else is a black sheep and he's a white sheep. So we see this kind of stuff all the time. It would be nice if that were true.
Yeah. Okay.
But it just doesn't work that way, unfortunately. Yeah, okay. Sorry.
No,
I wish it did work that way.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's just the way they filmed it in the
Yeah.
show, and so I just figured maybe the way they watch their parents or whoever's going through it, that they wouldn't be. But you never know what goes on behind closed doors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My wife has cousins. There were 3 of them. And of those 3, the mother was an alcoholic. And of those three, one of them became a screaming, raging alcoholic. One is a sometimes drinker, and the other one abstains completely. But, that's usually the way it works. Families, so if you have 3 kids, one kid identifies with mom, one kid identifies with dad, one kid is the odd man out. That's the odd person out. That's usually the way it works.
Okay.
As strange as that may seem. I mean, you can take that one to the bank. 3 is not a very good number.
No,
You either need to do the 4 thing, you need to have 4 or 2. But 3 just doesn't seem to work because one kid is always the odd man out.
Yeah, because like, I'm not saying we deal with this stuff in the pharmacy, but it's just, I have friends and like family members that have that. So like, it's just something that I think about sometimes too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just, I
Yeah,
thought-
that'd be nice if that worked.
Yeah.
Doesn't. 20% of all deaths in the United States every year are related to smoking, as stupid as that sounds. So what are we doing in the United States to curb smoking? Once upon a time when I was in the military, they used to give us our cigarettes with our C rations. They also used to sell cartons of cigarettes for $2 or $3 a carton. That's 10 packs for, it's like 20 cents a pop.
Duty free.
There you go, everything was good. But a lot of people died, of course. Veterans were dying by the masses. They were dying in their 50s and 60s from smoking-related deaths. 100% or 100,000 of these are due to lung cancer. If you see somebody dying in their 50s and 60s of some kind of cancer, you can probably bet on the fact they smoked, and the cancer probably came from the tobacco. Ovarian cancer in women, lung cancer, of course, in both men and women. The number of lung cancer cases for women has increased markedly since the 1950s, because before the 50s, women only the cool women smoked, the rest of the women didn't smoke. But it became very common. As a matter of fact, they started advertising for, cigarettes for women, Virginia Slims and all kinds of strange flavors. Now they've got vaping problems. The president, of course, said he's going to outlaw vaping, which ought to be really interesting, because he keeps saying things and then not doing them. Well, we'll see what happens. Of people over the age of 55, smoking doubles the probability of dementia, especially Alzheimer's disease, if you smoke over 55. About 125,000 deaths a year are associated with alcohol, many resulting from accidents and drunk driving, unfortunately. I had to change this. Back in 1999, as you can see, there were only 16,000 overdose deaths. Here in 2017, 70,000. So it's increased by quite a bit. 70,000 deaths a year are caused by illegal drugs. 8,000 more deaths are caused by drug-associated AIDS, as you can see. As the heroin epidemic increased, or the opiate epidemic increased, the number of deaths due to overdose just skyrocketed, as ridiculous as that seems. So now we're close to 80,000. And most of it is pharmaceuticals. We're not talking about illegal heroin. We're really talking about OxyContin and hydrocodone, fentanyl. As stupid as that sounds, why in the world why is there fentanyl on the streets? Fentanyl should be something locked up in a safe in the middle of the hospital.
What is it?
Fentanyl is 100 times stronger than morphine. If you go into the ER and you've got and you're in pain, they'll give you a shot of morphine. Well, fentanyl is 100 times stronger than that. There's no reason why you should ever give anybody fentanyl. Ever.
I don't think so either.
It's just ridiculous. Why, I mean, how could somebody possibly be in so much pain that you would have to hit them up with fentanyl? Fentanyl is what you knock people out, that's what you anesthetize people with, so that they can have surgery. Fentanyl.
What is it a combination of?
Fentanyl it's an opioid. It's an opioid. It's a synthetic opiate. it's just, it's manufactured, and actually it's coming over from China, and it seems to be, it's out on the streets. It's what killed Prince. It's what killed Heartbreakers, what's his first name? Tom Petty. Tom Petty. Had 6 different types of fentanyl in his system. Yeah, he had a patch, he had injectable, and he had 4 types of drugs, and they were all mixed with fentanyl. There's no reason that this stuff should be out on the street. Now they've got a stronger dosage, 1,000 times stronger than morphine. I'm trying to think what the name of it is.
I don't know.
That's stupid.
Yeah.
1,000, why in the world do we even have that stuff? To kill elephants with?
No, exactly. I know we carry fentanyl in our pharmacy,
Oh, sure.
but we only have like 2. But we don't.
You don't hand it out to
We
patients.
don't use it whatsoever.
No.
Only in
Why
like
would
extreme
you use it?
cases.
What is?
Well, you knock people out with it. It's an anesthesia, for anesthesia.
I watched a show, again, it's like a documentary show, it's called My 600-Pound Life, you know, people that are extremely overweight.
Right.
So when one of those patients, she fell out of the vehicle and she landed on her knees and her elbow and just whole side of her body, and it just swelled up like big time, and then they gave her fentanyl for that.
That's for the pain. It's not an analgesic. It doesn't reduce swelling.
Mhm.
I mean,
But
otherwise
it's because they were trying to
Right.
help her because she wouldn't stop moving.
Right.
But what they didn't know was that she was okay and she was just swelled up and that she was addicted to it.
Yeah, that's stupid. Fentanyl is so strong that the dust, when you create fentanyl, the dust will kill you if you breathe it. It has that much opioid in it. As crazy as that is. Scientists have been looking for cures of addiction for centuries. Many times treatments have been far more destructive than the addictions themselves. Back in the 19th century, they tried to use laudanum. Laudanum is tincture of opium. It is opium dissolved in alcohol. So they were using laudanum. I know, they were using laudanum to try to curb alcohol addiction. They gave it to Edgar Allan Poe. Poe was an alcoholic. Poe was very sensitive to alcohol. So if he drank anything at all, he became drunk.
Yeah.
So it was really fairly serious as far as he was concerned. He went to West Point, and he left West Point after 1.5 years because of drunkenness.
He went to Westwood?
Yeah, he went to West Point. Died in Baltimore. He was from Baltimore, actually, but he died in Baltimore, and they're not exactly sure why. If you ever watch Wyatt Earp, the movie or whatever, his girlfriend was hooked on this laudanum stuff. Tincture of opium. Tincture means dissolved in alcohol, as stupid as that sounds. They invented Coca-Cola as a substitute for alcohol. Coca-Cola in the beginning had cocaine in it.
I tell people that's what it's called, coca.
Yeah.
No, it's just the name of no, they put freaking yayo in the freaking soda.
Exactly.
Who did it or whatever.
I saw this meme one time talking about this. They're like, it's like an old person talking to a younger kid, like, oh, in my day, we used to do this and this and this. And then the young person's like, well, in your day, in your soda, you had cocaine.
Which is true to some extent. Actually, Coca-Cola still has cocaine in it. It just doesn't have the addictive substance. It has the flavor of, that's why Coke doesn't taste the same as Pepsi or RC or any other kind of cola that you're drinking. It has cocaine elixir in it, which doesn't have any of the cocaine properties. The stuff that they give to, or the stuff that they put in it to keep you awake is caffeine, of course. And where do they get the caffeine? The caffeine comes from coffee, when they process coffee. Oh, that's interesting. Since each drug has different effects on the nervous system, it's tricky creating a single model of addiction. Of course, that doesn't stop people from doing it. The first model that we ever came up with as far as addiction was concerned was a moral model. In a more moralistic era, back in the turn of the 20th century, people blamed drug abuse on the lack of moral character of the abuser. We had a lot of problems with alcohol in the United States. Tons of problems. There was a lot of abuse. We were losing a lot of man hours because men stayed drunk all weekend. They were beating their wives. They were killing their children. There was all kinds of horrible stuff going on. So we decided that what we would do, we would prohibit alcohol. So there was a prohibition movement in the United States. A lot of people don't understand this. They don't really look into it. But the reality was, when prohibition was passed in 1919, most of the states were already prohibited alcohol. 3/4 of the states already prohibited alcohol. And that's one of the reasons why it passed so rapidly, because the states already had laws on the books that said alcohol could not be produced or sold in their state. Including, well, not this, was a territory until 1912. Arizona was not one of those states. Most of the states were east of the Mississippi River. Anyway, so when they passed prohibition, there was already prohibition in almost all the states in the Union anyway, where most of the people were already living. So this was a really serious problem. And of course, we look back on prohibition and everybody laughs because of speakeasies and whatnot. But that was the moral model. Of course, they repealed prohibition in 1932, and the reason they repealed prohibition is because they needed the tax money from the alcohol. That's why they did it. It wasn't because of Al Capone or any of those other silly people. Didn't have anything to do with that. The number of people in the United States who were suffering from cirrhosis of the liver just tanked. The number of crimes being committed in the United States was reduced by 2/3. The number of crimes in the United States. A lot of crimes are crimes of passion, what we refer to as crimes of passion. The reason that people are so passionate is because they're drunk, okay? A lot of rapes, a lot of murders. It takes away your inhibitions. Alcohol takes away your inhibitions. So a lot of crimes are being committed. So we needed fewer police officers. And of course, we did have the corruption. And so strangely, most people focus on the corruption, not on anything else, as stupid as that sounds. The disease model, this came in the 1930s. They had AA, was very popular after they passed prohibition, because all of a sudden we had just this huge influx of drunks and people who had been off of, hadn't really used that much alcohol for 19 years. That's not right. How many years? 11, 12, 13 years. They had used alcohol for 13 years, and now all of a sudden you could have all the alcohol you wanted. So they started drinking again. But what they discovered was that now they were hopeless alcoholics, and there wasn't a whole lot that they could do about it. They couldn't control their behavior. So they started organizations to help these individuals, called organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous. Now responding to the moralists that pointed their fingers at the addiction sufferers, the disease model sees addiction as an affliction that the individual acquires and which requires treatment to cure. And that's pretty close to being true. They have acquired this problem because of the alcohol, and of course, if we don't treat them, then they're never going to be cured. The disease model has a large number of adherents because it does not deal with guilt and weaknesses as the moralistic model did, but sees the addiction as a chronic problem, which all of this is true. The problem is guilt, is the question of guilt. They don't accept guilt. It's not my fault, it's the alcohol. Well, geez, I mean, you could go to you go to court and say, yeah, I murdered the guy, but I was drunk at the time, so it wasn't my fault. I didn't know what I was doing. A lot of people do that anyway. Doesn't usually work. The physical dependence model is based on the withdrawal symptoms that an individual may go through after they have used a select drug. Drugs of abuse usually produce pleasurable feelings, hopefully, otherwise why the hell are you using it? Withdrawal symptoms usually are the opposite effect of the effects produced when using the drug. And this is one of the things that you need to remember. When we're talking about alcohol, we're talking about marijuana, we're talking about any drug that you're using, caffeine, for example. Some people, if they're not drinking coffee, they're grouchy, really grouchy. Now, why in the world are they grouchy? As long as they're drinking their caffeine, they're okay. But all of a sudden, they don't have any caffeine in their system, and now they're grumpy. Well, the same thing, yeah, is that you?
Well,
You got your coffee, say a word.
for the headaches too.
Yeah.
Caffeine helps with the headaches.
Same way with marijuana. When people are smoking pot, they're funny, everything's a joke. They can concentrate on stupid things. They don't.
So they're out.
There you go.
Fuck the world.
But afterwards, when they're not stoned, they're easily bored. I mean, so what happens is, if we can look at what happens to them when they're on their drugs, and we can turn that around 180 degrees, and that's the way they're going to act when they're not stoned or when they're not drunk. That's the way it works. Okay. So the question is, which do you like better? I have known individuals that just love their spouses because they were funny when they were drunk. But when they're not drunk, they're not very funny at all. They're kind of mean. Okay. Now my wife is, when she's drunk, she's mean. Which is kind of nice because that means when she's not drunk, she's fairly pleasant.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen very often. And as she gets older, it's happening less and less, which is a good thing. But there were times when I was ready to leave her. It was that bad. Because all of a sudden, she drinks a bottle of wine and all of a sudden I'm an asshole. You know, yeah.
I was like that with my ex. She would get like a 36 pack. And like I probably had like 2 or 3, you know. But I was acting duty and you know,
Sure.
You gotta wake up at like 4 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
Especially if you're an NCO, you gotta be there for your troops. And I've been getting ready for PT, and she's still been drinking. What the hell, man?
That's not good at all.
No, it's not.
That's not happiness.
And she go to work.
Wow. My second wife was an alcoholic, but she wasn't an alcoholic when that's not the way it is. She was an alcoholic before she met me. She used me to get sober, and then when things got a little bit stressful, she started drinking again. When she started drinking again, she didn't even like me. She didn't want to have anything to do with
Get out of
it.
here, bro.
Exactly. I mean, I was Mr. Perfect until then. And then all of a sudden, she started drinking, and she left, and she was gone for a couple of days. She came back for a day, and she was sober at this point. She apologized, and this will never happen again. And she left the same night. And then she was gone for a week. And then the next time she came back was to pack her clothes and leave. As horrible as that sounds. Okay, so I'm not a very good picker. Okay. Withdrawal symptoms usually are the opposite effects of what it is. So I was perfect until she had a couple drinks, and then I was Mr. Asshole. Morphine is an analgesic. With intravenous use, it produces an orgasmic rush that leads to a state of serene, drowsy euphoria. Withdrawal symptoms include irritability, tremors, and elevated heart rate. Goosebumps appear, and the individual goes through episodes of temperature maladjustment, sweats and chills. The sweats aren't nearly as bad as the chills are. And they tend to fluctuate between sweats and chills. And of course, the sweats, they're way too hot, and the chills, you can't warm them up. You can cover them up with all the blankets in the world, doesn't make any difference. And on top of this, they're nauseous. Now the problem is, they're like rabbits. Rabbits can't vomit. And it seems like these people can't vomit. Yeah, rabbits can't throw anything out. So if they eat a poison, they're dead. Yeah, they just die. So nausea, but they feel sick to their stomach, and they keep gagging, and they'll stick their finger down their throat, trying to make themselves throw up, but they can't.
Yeah.
They can't throw up. As the individual progresses through withdrawals, the physiological changes that have occurred because of the drug to compensate for the drug affects the individual. They also have what we refer to as flop sweats. It stings. It really smells bad because they're scared. They're really scared. So if you've ever been around somebody that's scared, they put off a really interesting odor. I'm sure yeah, a whole unit of guys, and they're scared, so they're putting off this really strange odor, and it affects you. I mean, you will, if you ever smell it, you'll get scared. It makes you scared because you're reacting to the odor. And that's what happens with these guys. So a lot of people, if you're working in one of these wards, it's really kind of tough, because especially if you react to smells, which I do. I have a fairly good sense of smell, so I really react to smells a lot. So I couldn't work on a rehab ward for more than a couple of days, or I was all tense because of all the strange odors coming out off the place. And of course, people can't throw up, so they feel like if they could throw up, they would get better. It's just like the flu. It's just like having the flu. If I could just get this out of my stomach, I'm going to be fine. Anyway. Withdrawal symptoms can be relieved by re-administering the drug. That works within 15 to 20 minutes. The individual has returned to a state of euphoria instead of the one of painful agitation. But of course, you can't do this. You can't allow this to happen. You can't allow them to use again. If they start using again, they won't stop again. And this is the reason that they don't want to stop using. This is the reason why it's so difficult to get these people off of their drugs, because it hurts to come off of it. People almost never die from heroin, from withdrawal symptoms from heroin. It's like having the flu. It's like what you just experienced. That's it. And they don't die. But getting the DTs from alcohol, well, people die. It's not that uncommon. There was a TV actress. What was her name?
The wedding?
She was the one on the 70s show, the blonde.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. She died in rehab not because of this, but it was alcohol. It was alcohol withdrawals. They checked her in one night, and the next morning when they went to get her, she had died.
How?
It's a lot more severe. Alcohol's a lot worse than this stuff. The reason that people don't want to get off of heroin is because it feels so good to be on it. Mm-hmm. It's euphoric, it's orgasmic.
Yeah.
Alcohol is kind of a slow increase in feelings, but heroin is an immediate increase. That's why there are so many rock stars that are heroin addicts. And of course they have to go to rehab in order to clean up, because if there are any place where they can get the drug, they will go and get it. And it seems like this is going to kill you, but it doesn't. I mean, it just doesn't. It feels like a really bad flu, is what it feels like. As stupid as that sounds. Well, some drugs have striking withdrawal symptoms, like opiates and alcohol. Others do not. Cocaine and marijuana, for example, have little to no physical withdrawal symptoms. For a long time, they didn't think that cocaine was addictive. They didn't, and people still claim that marijuana is not addictive. But the marijuana stays in your system for an extended length of time. So if you had a really fun weekend this weekend and smoked a lot of pot, you're going to have that marijuana in your system for up to a month. It's going to be in your system. It's fat soluble, so it stays in your system.
Depends how much you smoke too.
Oh, that's a good point. Of course, yeah.
Trust me, I was young.
So for a whole month, you're going to have this stuff in your system. So you're going to be coming down from your marijuana high very slowly. So it's almost like it takes away all the withdrawal symptoms completely. You're just kind of grouchy, that's all.
Yeah.
In cases of cocaine and marijuana, especially with cocaine, the individual becomes psychologically dependent on the drug. The psychological pull is just as strong as the physical need that may be experienced with other substances. Now we do know that cocaine is addictive. Cocaine clears your system fairly quickly. So it's actually the opposite situation. Marijuana stays in your system for an extended length of time. Cocaine leaves your system really fast. And since it leaves your system so rapidly, that's why people rarely get addicted to it. The positive reward model came from animal research. Since animals are known to consume addictive substances in nature, researchers sought to discover if an animal could learn to take drugs. Using a simple direct feedback system, they discovered that animals learn to induce effects very rapidly. Researchers found that animals would engage in self-inducement even at levels that did not produce addiction. So animals will use just like humans do. We're talking about rats mostly. A wide variety of addictive drugs release dopamine in the nucleus accumbens just as food does in a hungry animal. So if you're really hungry, or you're really hungry for something like a hamburger, and you're just dying for a really good hamburger, and then you eat that hamburger, it releases dopamine in your brain, and you really enjoy that hamburger. And the reason you're enjoying it so much is because of the dopamine in your brain. And it's released right there in the nucleus accumbens. This dopamine originates in the area of the brain that is referred to as the ventral tegmental region of the midbrain. So we're dealing with the nucleus accumbens, we're dealing with the ventral tegmental area, and to complete the loop, we have the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is where joy comes from. It's where hypothalamus controls your sex drive. So the hypothalamus is extremely important. So this is a dopaminergic loop that we're creating. We're creating a positive reward model. And there is our loop. We don't have our hypothalamus. But this is the loop. Nucleus accumbens, ventral tegmental area, and the hypothalamus. That is the loop that is created. Now remember I said that my great-great-nephew has a problem, will have a problem with addiction in the future. And the reason is because this loop has been created for him. One of the things that we discovered looking at individuals coming out of Vietnam, we sent 8 million men to Vietnam. In 12 years we sent 8 million men over there. A lot of them were draftees. And one of the things we discovered was that some individuals suffered from PTSD, whether they were in severe combat or not. We had people that were suffering from PTSD who weren't even in combat. They were just in country. And they were suffering from PTSD. So we looked back at their history, and what we discovered was that if they had been abused as children, then this loop had been created in their brains. And all they needed to do was to re-trigger that abuse, not the abuse. They re-trigger the fear that they felt when they were children. And they were the ones suffering from PTSD. The individuals that had lived a life that was fairly free of trauma, these individuals didn't suffer from PTSD. Not nearly to the extent that the other individuals did. Sometimes their PTSD was devastating. They couldn't function at all. And they came back and they did strange things like committed crimes so that they would be thrown in jail, so that they could be in that discipline model of incarceration, like they had when they were in the military.
They felt safer.
They felt safer, exactly. As weird as that sounds. So the problem that my great-great-nephew has is that this loop was created when he was in the womb. And now he is seeking pleasure. That's all he cares about is pleasure. And the more pleasure he can find, more repeated pleasure he can find, the more likely he's going to become addicted to things. And that's what I told my brother. You're going to have to watch for this. Now, we need to go into my sister-in-law, who's dumb as dirt. She's a teacher, so she thinks she knows everything. You know, teachers, they think they know everything. This dopaminergic pathway from the ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens to the hypothalamus serves as a reward system for many experiences, for food, for everything. It's a reward pathway. The addictive powers of drugs may come through stimulation of this pathway. Using a dopamine agonist reduces the cravings for some drugs. And we do have dopamine agonists. Naltrexone is a great example. It stops this whole process. Biological factors: males are more likely to abuse drugs than females are, because your brain is more hardwired as males. You have a smaller corpus callosum, so your brain's more hardwired than the female brain is. There may be also a genetic predisposition for this. An alcoholic biological parent makes it more likely that a child will be addictive as well. And when we say addictive, we're not just talking about the alcohol, we're also talking about any drugs. So these individuals have to stay away from these drugs. I had a friend, he was an alcoholic for a long time. He'd been an alcoholic for about 17 years. And then he just cleaned up. He just decided he wasn't going to do it anymore. He was Native, and he decided that he was going to become a healer. And so he stopped drinking. And he was very successful at not drinking. Unfortunately, he replaced his drinking, his alcohol, with gambling. And so now you can't let him get anywhere close to money, because if he gets close to money, he spends it. He gambles it away. He doesn't, and it would be okay if he gambled and was $600 ahead when he was at the end of the day, but he's the kind of guy that if he goes into a casino, he has to lose all that money, or whatever money he has. So, and people would put him in charge of the powwow fund. So here he is, he's the guy with the checkbook for the powwow, and it's all gone. All the money's gone because he's gambled it away. He can't gamble and win. He has to gamble and lose. In other words, when he gambles, he has to lose all of his money.
That's what my friend's wife was. She had a master's psychology from Pepperdine,
Mm-hmm.
pretty decent school.
Sure.
She was, she worked for the city of San Diego, they got a controller.
Right.
Well, the controller's like the big one, well, she was like 2 below that one.
So she had access to money.
Yeah, she did a title loan with her BMW. She had an older model Land Rover, and now she's living somewhere in Santa Ana.
She had to lose all that money every time she went in. Sometimes it'd take all weekend. Sometimes it'd take 3 days to lose all that money. But when she went home empty. Always hitting on empty. And that's the kind of gambler that casinos like. They like those gamblers because they will lose all the money that they have, and they will gamble until they lose it. Personal characteristics: aggressiveness and tendency to act out emotional states are characteristics of drug abusers, just like as if they were still a teenager. A lot of times, one of the things that we do know about alcohol is that when you start drinking, that's when your brain stops maturing. So your brain is stuck at that point. If you start drinking at 13, you're going to act like a 13-year-old until you stop drinking. Now your brain will mature, but you're still going to act like a 13-year-old. And that may be one of the reasons why a lot of the movies coming out of Hollywood they've got all these fart jokes in them. Well, wait a minute, we stopped laughing at that when we were 14 years old. Well, it's because these guys started smoking pot when they were 13, and now their brains are stuck. Characteristics that negate abuse: school achievement, high educational goals, religiousness. All of these things will negate addictive behavior. So going to school, wanting to have a PhD, wanting to be a counselor, going to church or going to the mosque or whatever, wherever you happen to go, or the NAC. They had the TP was up this weekend, so evidently they had an NAC meeting. I think it was Friday night.
I saw them put it up Friday morning because we had breakfast with the Board of Regents.
Oh, okay.
But I think it was.
Yeah, I think it's Friday night. Family situation, factors related to drug abuse include divorce of parents and having an antisocial sibling. I had a friend that his brother was a beatnik. Beatnik, what's that? Back in the 50s, the people that were cool were the guys that were the beatniks. And they wore their hair real fuzzy and they had goatees and nobody else was wearing goatees. They never wore hats because everybody wore hats back then and they were the ones that didn't wear hats. If you've ever seen Dobie Gillis, Maynard G. Krebs was a beatnik. Of course, they morphed into the hippies, but...
Like the 70s show.
So yeah, they morphed into the hippies later on. But this friend of mine, his brother, was a beatnik, and he decided that he was diabetic. So he decided he wanted to be just like his brother. But of course, by that time, the beatniks were now hippies. So he got his teeth knocked out. I mean, it was a real attractive situation. Died at 39 of alcoholism.
Dang.
Yeah, well, he's a diabetic. Diabetics can't drink. And he tried to. He was real smart. So he used to figure out how much he was going to drink a case of beer tonight. So he would shoot up with that much insulin. They said this is the dumbest thing in the world. Yeah. So he had to start drinking right away when he took his insulin. You know, and he had it down to a science, except it didn't work. Well, he died at 39. Strong ties to parents protects against drug abuse. Social and community factors, high prevalence of drug use in the community, especially by the peer group, and it's more likely that you will use as well. So it all depends on where you grow up. My friend grew up in a household with an antisocial sibling, so he became antisocial as well, and he became a drug abuser. Well, he was an alcoholic. It is possible to stop on your own. Usually when people stop smoking, they don't use any tricks, they just stop. Same way with alcohol. 90% of ex-smokers and 50% of problem drinkers seem to quit on their own. Usually there's something happens in their life and they stop for that reason. I used to have an addiction. I used to chew my fingernails. Oh. I stopped because I started teaching, and I didn't want to be a bad influence on my students. So I taught high school. First year I taught high school out of the military. And actually, I was still in the military when I started teaching. I was on terminal leave, and I started teaching. And I went to the high school, and it turned out that all the teachers chewed their fingernails right down to the quick. And here I was trying to, grow my fingernails so that I wouldn't be a bad influence on the kids. I was like the only teacher in the school with fingernails. The women would have those artificial fingernails. They'd peel them off and chew their fingernails, and they'd put the...
Why, was the school that bad, or what?
No, it's just, it's not easy teaching high school. It's tough. It wasn't a bad high school, it was a pretty good high school, but all the teachers just chewed their fingernails. Drugs for detoxification, drugs to control the withdrawal symptoms, agonists of drugs that produce common addiction states. Methadone is an alpha opiate receptor agonist that constrains the cravings for heroin. So methadone works.
In my neighborhood, there's a clinic.
A methadone clinic?
Man, at like 7 o'clock, there'll be like a freaking line around the corner.
Well, sure, they can't give you, let's see, how's methadone work? Methadone works for 2 days. So if you take your methadone on Friday, by Sunday you're pretty strung out. I mean, it works for 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, the line would be
Especially on Monday morning, yeah.
Jeez.
I know. Antagonists to the addictive drug, naltrexone, of course, is an antagonist to the opiate receptor, blocking the effect of drug. We can use naltrexone on just about anything that is addictive, and it works. Anti-craving medications, substances that affect the desire for the drug. We can use antidepressants, SSRIs, and usually it will work on alcohol withdrawals. Medications that block drug metabolism Antabuse blocks the metabolism of alcohol, producing instead acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde, if you stick it on your stomach, you vomit it back up. Yeah, it's pretty nasty stuff. And it stinks. Oh my God, it smells like formaldehyde. We had a first sergeant, when I was in Germany, we had a first sergeant that was a raging alcoholic. Just, he's terrible. I mean, he stayed at the NCO club like all the time. If he wasn't working, he was in the NCO club drinking a lot. Not just a little bit. His wife got pissed, and so she went to the doctor and she convinced him that they needed to, if he didn't stop, he's gonna kill himself, which he eventually did anyway. But, so the doctor gave her Antabuse, and she was slipping this Antabuse in his morning coffee or something anyway. Then he would go to the NCO club and get raging sick. And this went on for a couple of weeks, him getting sick every time, and he was afraid, of course, that he had cancer. He thought he had, he thought he was dying, which he felt like he was. Yeah, well, he was creating all this acetaldehyde. So then he went to the doctor and said, geez, I think I'm dying. I think I need to retire because I can't function. And his function had really decreased. And the doctor, of course, told him that, well, your wife convinced me to give you Antabuse. So he tried to sue them, but of course you can't sue the federal government. You can't sue doctors for malpractice in the military. So that didn't work. But he divorced his wife, and later on he developed a peptic ulcer. So when he drank, he started vomiting again, of course. But it was the alcohol on his stomach with the ulcer. And that killed him. Eventually he hemorrhaged and died. The funny thing was, that's not that funny, so he followed me. I was in Germany, and then my next station was Offutt Air Force Base in Bellevue, Nebraska. I was at Offutt, and damn it, if he didn't go to Offutt. So I got to watch him die. I mean, he was, we had him in the ICU, and he was hemorrhaging. And I was the one that got to transfuse all of his blood. I was the one that had to cross-match all of his blood. And we cross-matched the entire blood bank for this guy. I mean, he was vomiting. It was that bad. They were pumping him full of the blood, and then they were making him swallow ice chips, which isn't the easiest thing in the world because that slows down the bleeding in the stomach. Anyway, so we saved his life. I worked all night long. I worked until noon. If you're cross-matching blood, you can't stop, right? You're the one that's been cross-matching blood, and you have to continue. So I worked at like a 24-hour shift. Oh, God. In the military, you don't get overtime, ever. I know. So I saved this guy's life, and the son of a bitch, he checks himself out of the hospital. Finally stops the ulcer, he checks himself out of the hospital, and he goes on a bender, and I was the one that checked him into the morgue like 5 days later. I was so pissed. I worked my ass off trying to keep that guy alive. Anyway, you know, how things work, as weird as that is. Anyway. Okay, the reason this is up here is because when I was working, when I was teaching at Fort Belknap, one of the big things up in rodeo country is keeping a can of Skoal in your pocket so that you got that ring on your butt. Okay, evidently it's something that you have to do when you're in rodeo country. Anyway, a lot of people either chew tobacco or they dip snuff. Well, most people dip snuff.
I do.
There you go. And I was trying to show them, well, when you smoke a cigarette, you take a puff, and then your nicotine level, or dopamine, actually it's dopamine level goes down. But when you chew tobacco, of course, it stays up. It's a constant. And I was trying to show them how dangerous it is. The other thing about snuff is that they have fiberglass. There's fiberglass in the snuff, and it cuts your lip. And that's why it gets into your system so fast.
I never did until I became a drill sergeant.
Okay, so you couldn't smoke.
No, But also, I mean, you're freaking dealing with, you guys have never held a weapon in their freaking lives.
Of course.
You're just like, let's do this.
Sure. Keeps
Plus,
you awake.
it kind of wakes you up in the morning. too.
Exactly. That's what nicotine does. Anyway, so there you go. That's the reason it's up there. Trying to convince you not to use it anymore. Because your nicotine level is that high. And it can cause all kinds of interesting problems in your mouth. I had a friend that chewed tobacco, as dumb as that is. Chewed tobacco, and he was a judge. What happened was he got cancer of the lymph nodes in his neck. There you go, okay. Throw that shit away. Anyway, so now he lost all the muscles on the left side of his face. So now he walks around like this. And when he talks to you, he can't lift his head up to talk to you. He has to bend his back.
Lean back.
Yeah, I've actually seen like where they actually have to cut out
Yeah.
like the big part of their cheek.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a pet, and they have to talk to
That's attractive, isn't it?
It's like, dang, man.
I had a friend.
They did it for like 40 plus years or so.
Right. I had a first sergeant who had lost this part of his face, all the way down from his nose. So he used to put a piece of gauze over his face, and he would talk without using his lips because he didn't have an upper lip. It was gone. And every once in a while, the gauze would shift, and you could see, you know, into his brain, into his sinuses. It's not the most attractive thing in the world. Anyway, he died. The cancer got into his brain and he died. Anyway, that was, I can't even remember his name, Sergeant somebody. Nice guy though. I mean, he's a really good first sergeant. And of course, he was dying, so dying people are always nicer than people that don't think they're dying. Okay. We're going to talk about hormones now. I was talking about hormones with Jeremiah Barber, our new psychology instructor. Really smart, nice guy. Really, really good guy. You need to take classes from Jeremiah. He's really good. Anyway, we're talking about pheromones, and he doesn't think pheromones exist. And he's right. Pheromones don't exist for him, and they don't exist potentially for you, unless you've got genes from some other place other than Navajo. If you're 100% Navajo, the probability that you can detect pheromones is fairly remote. Why is that? Well, it's because populations that have had arranged marriages for extended lengths of time have lost their pheromone capability. The Japanese don't have pheromones. You guys don't have pheromones. Who else doesn't have pheromones?
India.
In India? Yeah, I guess they don't. I know the Japanese don't.
Hajis or Iraqis?
Oh, jeez. Arabs? They've had arranged marriages. It's
India they do too.
yeah.
They're traditional.
Right, yeah. It's possible. Probable. So if we're talking about pheromones, we're probably talking about Europeans, and we're talking about Africans, and some Asians, but not Japanese, not the Japanese. Any place that has had arranged marriages for an extended length of time, they don't recognize pheromones, and there's a reason for it. We're going to talk about pheromones later. I got lots of stories about pheromones. Animals, because I'm a European, so sure I've got lots of stories about pheromones. Animals use several types of chemical signals in the body to communicate or deliver information. The neurocrine is synaptic communication. Neurocrine communication, that means communication between the neurons. Autocrine, hormone activating the releasing gland, if it's right next to it, that's autocrine. Paracrine, hormone is targeting nearby cells, paracrine. Endocrine, of course, hormone is passing through the blood to a distant target. We all have endocrine communication. So all of us have all four of these. Pheromones are communications between different individuals. Pheromones. And it doesn't, you guys don't have pheromones, it's the way it works. And I do. So I know this stuff works. So it's a really odd conversation between Jeremiah and I, because he's 100% Navajo, and he's had arranged, you guys have been in arranged marriages for thousands of years, and I'm European, and we haven't ever had arranged marriages. We found the one that smelled the best, and that's the person that we hooked up with. Okay. I can use the word hook up, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fine.
Neurocrine communication is synaptic communication. This communication is highly localized, of course, so it's between one neuron and the next, and that's a neurocrine communication. Autocrine function in an autocrine cell, the secreted hormone is released by the cell, and then it finds receptors on the other, on their own cell to attach to, and this is what happens in your pancreas. You've got a select cell is releasing glycogen, or it's releasing insulin, and it's communicating with itself. But there has to be chemical flow between one cell and the other, or one side of the cell and the other. Paracrine cells release a chemical communicator that affects a nearby target cell. This happens in the pancreas as well. The strongest impacts are to nearby cells, paracrine, and this happens in the pancreas. Endocrine, of course, communication is through the release of a hormone into the bloodstream. The blood takes the hormonal signal to distant targeted organs, where the hormone changes the function of the targeted organ. Pituitary gland releases ACTH. ACTH goes down to the adrenal glands and it releases corticosteroids. Pheromone function, hormones released into the environment are carried from their originator to another individual of the same species. Human females may release pheromones that regulate their menstrual cycles. We talk about pheromones from time to time. This is really kind of a fascinating topic. Women who live together eventually will synchronize their menstrual periods. How do they do this? They see somebody that's on their menstrual period and they go, oh, I want to do that. That's not what happens. What happens is the ladies, as their cycle is changing, they put off pheromones. The pheromones tell the people around them that this is what's happening, and eventually they will synchronize. They will synchronize their periods, as bizarre as that seems. If you watched Big Bang Theory at one point, Amy and Penny synchronized their which was a big deal for both of them because they were best friends, the whole mess. Okay, as weird as that sounds. So people are putting off these odors all the time. They're putting off hormonal odors that become pheromones. When I was working in the laboratory, one of my jobs was doing pregnancy tests on urine. So they'd have to give me a urine specimen, and I would test it to find out if the woman had HCG. If she had HCG in her system, that meant that she was pregnant. But HCG actually has an odor to it. So sometimes I could tell if she was pregnant just by the smell of the urine, as weird as that sounds. Now, most people don't go around sniffing urine, and I tried not to. It wasn't that I was smelling the urine, it was just an odor that was put off. Yeah, exactly. It's take a little sniff of the urine. That's not what was happening. It was not that way. I was lining these suckers up, and I was going, somebody's knocked up. I'm sorry. Somebody's pregnant here.
Yeah.
Okay. I can smell it, all right? I have a really strong sense of smell, so I was able to detect the pheromones or the hormones that she puts off when she's pregnant. It was weird. It was really, really strange. Halomones are chemical signals that are released by one species and affect members of another species. Now, if a dog's in heat, we can't tell. we don't detect their pheromones. If a cat's in heat, we don't know. We have no clue whether the cow is is ovulating. We can't tell that because we don't detect their pheromones. But flowers will put off pheromones in order to attract bees, and they'll come from miles away. Dogs, when the dog goes into heat, you'll see dogs that you've never seen before. Male dogs coming over. Female dogs will get out of the way. They'll leave. So if she's in heat, they take off. They don't want to be anywhere close to that dog in heat because all those males are going to be coming in and fighting over the reproductive rights for that female, as weird as that sounds. And this happens, you can have one cat, you've got a cat, there's not a cat for 5 miles. She goes into heat and all of a sudden you got tomcats climbing through your garage. I'm trying to find it, gain access to that cat, that female. Flowers will release pheromones to attract insects, of course, that's what we were talking about before. 10 general principles of hormone action. Hormones frequently act in a gradual fashion. Behavioral and physical responses occur only after weeks of treatment and may last for several days. So if we treat somebody with hormones, sometimes it takes a while for it to kick in. And sometimes it'll last for an extended period of time. So sometimes if we're trying to regulate your hormones, we only have to treat you for a month, and then everything's going to be okay. It's going to, and then usually your hormones will kick in, and you'll start producing what we are giving you. When hormones do alter behavior, they tend to act by changing the intensity or probability of the behavior. They do not act as a switch. It's not like we can give you a shot of. When I was working in a clinic in Oklahoma, we had a guy that would come in and he would get his testosterone shot on Wednesday so that he could have sex on the weekend, over the weekend. That was the deal. So he'd come in on Wednesday, we'd give him a shot of testosterone. He had low T, which isn't all that common. But he had low T, so we'd give him a shot of testosterone on Wednesday, and by Saturday he was good to go. Usually, that's the way it worked. It's not like a switch. I mean, we gave him that testosterone. You've got free circulating testosterone and you've got testosterone in your brain. It didn't make him exceedingly horny, I guess. When we gave him the shot, that's not the way it worked. It took a couple days for it to run through his system so it would get into his brain. If we didn't give him this testosterone shot, he could take all the Viagra in the world, it didn't make any difference. It didn't work. He didn't have any sexual desire. We had to give him his testosterone shot on Wednesday so he would be desirous of sex on Saturday or Sunday, whichever.
And that was like every week you would do that, or?
Well, it was 2 or 3 times a month.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, all dependent.
Yeah.
I don't know on what. I wasn't involved in that aspect of it.
Well, like anybody that has, any men that have low T, it can be used for that and a lot of other things, or is that what it's mainly used for?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why they talk about low T. I don't know. It makes you, free circulating testosterone isn't the stuff that makes you desirous of sex. It's the stuff in your brain. Okay. So if we increase the amount of testosterone, your free flowing testosterone, eventually it's going to get into your brain. And that's what was going on with him. I was there for 4 years, and by the end of this time, he was slowing down, and it wasn't working as well as it did. He had some weekends where it didn't work. So he wasn't producing a lot. He had lost a testicle in Vietnam. So he wasn't producing. Normally your testicles will produce, if you lose one, then the other one will just kick in, will just do double duty. But in his case, He had a family history of low testosterone levels anyway, and so we were just trying to help him.
Yeah.
Okay. And anyway, well, it kind of worked. The quantities and types of hormones released are influenced by environmental as well as internal factors. This is really an interesting situation. My football team lost on Saturday, and I was feeling pretty depressed. If you had looked at my testosterone level on Saturday night, it would probably have been fairly low, because if your team wins, it makes you feel good, and then your testosterone level goes up. If your team loses, you feel bad, and so your testosterone level goes down. So it has to do with environmental factors. When we talk about violent rape, what we're dealing with an individual who is using, he's punishing, a lot of times, especially if it's a violent rape, he's punishing the female for one reason or another. It has to do with his background. But a lot of times he doesn't complete the rape. A lot of times he goes through the motions and he doesn't actually ejaculate. He doesn't ejaculate, he certainly doesn't ejaculate inside the woman, but he's just trying to punish them. Why am I talking about? Oh, we're talking about environmental factors. So the friendlier that the female is, the more likely that the man will react to her being friendly. High levels of testosterone cause aggressive behavior. The most aggressive individual wins an encounter and maintains their testosterone level, while the loser suffers a lowering of testosterone after the encounter. As weird as that, well, I was just talking about my team losing over the weekend. All their seniors, none of their seniors played. I'm wondering what happened.
What team?
Oh, it's my college team,
Which one?
Wabash.
Oh,
It's
your
tiny,
school team.
yeah, tiny little liberal arts college in Indiana. That's my school. Each hormone has multiple effects on different tissue, organs, and behavior. Conversely, a single type of behavior or physiological change can be affected by many different hormones. Hormones are produced in small amounts and are secreted in bursts. Pulsating patterns are sometimes crucial for the small amount of hormone to be effective. So it has to come out in bursts, and this is the way it works with testosterone. Your testicles are producing testosterone all the time. If it didn't come out in bursts, then we would be horny boogers like all the time, but that's not the way it works. There are times when we are more sexually receptive than others. Levels of many hormones vary rhythmically throughout the day. Many hormonal systems are controlled by circadian clocks in your brain. Cortisol levels, for example, when you have cortisol surge at 8 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. 8 o'clock in the morning to wake you up, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so that you can find someplace safe to a secure area for the night. 8 and 4. All humans are the same. If I took your cortisol level at 8 o'clock and then I took your cortisol level at 10 o'clock, your cortisol level at 8 o'clock would be much higher than at 10 o'clock. So at 8 o'clock in the morning you have this natural surge of cortisol. Cortisol is the gets you going, it gets you moving. It can also cause anxiety. So we have a natural surge at 4 o'clock. As weird as that sounds, and we're all exactly the same. And it has to be exactly at 8 o'clock, as weird as that is. I used to draw a lot of blood, and when I drew blood from, for cortisol levels, I had to draw it exactly at 8 o'clock, or at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Come on. We're almost done. Hormones affect the metabolic process in most cells and induce long-term metabolic change through the buildup and breakdown of carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, and that's number 7. We'll finish this list next time. Hi, how you doing? It must be Monday.
Yeah.
We'll be done right now.
There was nobody outside.